Hello students, this is Dr. Dakshayani, Assistant Professor from Department of Zoology, Maharani Science College for Women, Bengaluru. Students, as we all know that endoskeleton of frog is conveniently divided into two main headings, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton is the one which lies along the longitudinal axis of the body, and it includes skull, mandible, vertebral column and sternum. In our previous class, we had learnt in detail about the structure of skull and mandible of frog endoskeleton, and in today's session, let us understand the remaining part of axial skeleton, that is the vertebral column and the sternum of frog endoskeleton. The objectives of learning today's topic is to identify and distinguish vertebrae present in vertebral column and parts of sternum, and also to develop the skill of drawing and labeling the diagrams of bones. The contents as follows: introduction to the vertebral column and sternum and detailed parts of vertebral column and sternum of frog. The amphibians carry the entire body weight on four legs, and this places the entirely new set of stress on the vertebral column, which is completely bony in nature and articulated together to provide more strength to the vertebral column. As a result, there is a new muscle attachments and development of special processes and parts of the vertebrae has taken place in frog endoskeleton. The vertebral column encloses and protects the entire spinal cord. The vertebral column of frog is exceptionally short because of absence of tail, and it consists of only 10 bony elements which are arranged in a linear series. The first 9 are small ring-like bones called vertebrae, and the 10th one is the urostyle, which is a long rod-like bone, and it extends from the 9th vertebrae to the apex of the pelvic girdle. The sternum is the other part of the axial skeleton. It is present in the mid-ventral line of the body and connected between the two halves of the pectoral girdle. It is bony as well as cartilaginous in nature, and it consists of 4 parts, that is episternum, omosternum, mesosternum and xiphisternum. The ribs are absent in frog. Coming to the detailed structure of vertebral column of frog, as I mentioned in the previous slide, the vertebral column consists of totally 10 vertebrae. Among them, from the 3rd to 7th vertebrae of vertebral column in the frog are called as typical vertebrae, as they have typical parts of a vertebra. When you observe that, you can have a look at these pictures. Each vertebra is ring-like and has a hole called neural canal in the center. The ventral thick solid rod-like part of the vertebra is called the centrum or the body of vertebra, which is concave in front and convex posteriorly. This type of centrum is called procoelus. Dorsal to the neural canal, there is a neural arch which is drawn or stretched out into a small mid-dorsal process called neural spine. And at the sides of neural arch, it bears a pair of elongated outwardly directed process called the transverse process, which extend almost at right angles to the body. The anterior and posterior margins of neural arch bears articular facets called pre-zygapophysis and post-zygapophysis respectively. Have a look at the second vertebra. When you observe the second vertebra, it is similar in structure to the typical vertebra, but the neural spine is short and the transverse processes are short, broad and flat. Whereas the fourth vertebra also similar in structure to the typical vertebra, but the transverse processes are broad distally. Coming to the first vertebra of frog vertebral column, it is called atlas. It is highly specialized because it has to support the skull on the anterior face. It is a small ring-shaped vertebra and it is devoid of transverse process and pre-zygapophysis. That means the transverse process as well as the pre-zygapophysis are absent. It has a reduced centrum and neural spine. The anterior face of the centrum bears a pair of oval concave facets for the articulation of the occipital condyles. In the concave facets, the knob-like occipital condyles of the skull fits in and brings about the movement of the skull. The neural arch is well developed and has post-zygapophysis on the posterior margins. Coming to the eighth vertebra of the vertebral column, the eighth vertebra is also slightly resembles the typical vertebrae in all the aspects, but is slightly differ by having amphicoelous centrum. That means the centrum has two concavities. One is anterior concavity, which receives the convexity of the seventh vertebra, and the other one is the posterior concavity, which receives the convexity of the ninth vertebra. In the eighth vertebra, the transverse processes are long, slender, pointed, and they are outwardly directed. The pre-zygapophysis and the post-zygapophysis are present on anterior and posterior margins of the neural arch. The ninth are sacral vertebrae. This vertebrae differs in many aspects from the typical vertebrae, where its centrum is biconvex in nature. That means it bears two convexities. When you observe the picture, you will notice that the centrum bears one anterior convexity that fits into the posterior concavity of the eighth vertebra, that is with the preceding vertebra, and the centrum bears two posterior convexities that fits into the anterior convexities of the urostyle, that is the succeeding vertebra of it. In the ninth vertebra, the transverse processes are large, cylindrical, strong, and they are stout, and they are directed backward, articulating with the ilia of the pelvic girdle, where the neural spine is greatly reduced and the pre-zygapophyses are well developed, but the post-zygapophyses are absent. Coming to the 10th vertebrae, which is the last vertebrae, and it is the it is the posterior unsegmented part of vertebral column called urostyle. It is a long bone articulating with the ninth vertebra, where it is somewhat triangle in shape that you can notice in the picture. It has a broad anterior end and a tapering posterior end. On the dorsal side, it has a elevated prominent structure called the keel or the ridge, which extends nearly up to the posterior end. In urostyle, the centrum is rod-like that bears a pair of concavities on the anterior face for the articulation with the ninth vertebra. Where the neural canal is small and narrow that encloses the terminal part of the spinal cord. There is also a pair of small apertures on either side of the urostyle at the anterior end for the exit of last pair of spinal nerves. When you observe the entire vertebral column of frog, you will notice that all the centra, that is bodies of the vertebrae, are joined together by means of pads of hyaline cartilage, and the connecting ligaments extend along both the dorsal and ventral surfaces of the centra. The neural arches and the neural spines are joined by ligaments, and the spinal nerves make their exit through the intervertebral foramen, that is holes between the sides of the neural arches. Coming to the last part of the axial skeleton, that is sternum. Sternum is a long flat bone present in the mid-ventral line of the body, and it is connected between the two halves of the pectoral girdle, where the clavicles and the coracoid in particular are attached to it. The sternum consists of four main parts. They are episternum, omosternum, mesosternum, and xiphisternum. When you observe in the picture, the anteriormost flat circular cartilaginous disc is called episternum, and below the episternum lies a bony rod-like structure called the omosternum, which is connected with the clavicles. The mesosternum is a cartilaginous rod which is ensheathed in bone and is projecting behind the epicoracoids. The terminal broad cartilaginous plate is called the xiphisternum. And there are no ribs in frog endoskeleton, where in frogs cartilage and bones are attached to the pectoral girdle only, and it acts as a skid. Students, hope you could able to understand in detail about the vertebrae present in the vertebral column and parts of the sternum in the frog. Let us answer few multiple choice questions for the better understanding of today's topic. The first question is, the centra or body of all the vertebrae in frog are procellus in condition, except the 8th vertebra, 9th vertebra, or both 8th and 9th vertebra, or none of these. The answer is C. Yes, both 8th and 9th vertebrae doesn't have procellus condition in vertebrae. Second question is, which of these vertebrae are absent in frog? Cervical vertebrae, caudal vertebrae, lumbar vertebrae, or all of these? answer is D. Yes, in frog endoskeleton, it doesn't have the cervical vertebrae, caudal vertebrae, and the lumbar vertebrae. That is why the frog endoskeleton is extremely short in length. The answer is D. The third question is, a vertebrae in frog having same length as vertebral column, mid-ventral prominent ridge or crest, and two concavities anteriorly. Is it atlas vertebra, typical vertebra, ninth vertebra, or the urostyle? The answer is D, urostyle. It is having almost the length of the vertebral column. The fourth question is, in frog, the sternal element over omosternum is called xiphisternum, episternum, omosternum, or mesosternum. The answer is B, the episternum. The fifth question is, inverted Y-shaped bone in the sternum of frog is omosternum, xiphisternum, is it mesosternum, or episternum? The answer is A. It is the omosternum, which has got Y-shaped structure. These are the few references. You can look into it for some more informations from the website and from some books. Thank you.